Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Sorry for the lateness of this video this week. Been playing catch up. It looks like a couple people have already started on the work, but I still wanted to go ahead and put this video out there to just kind of chat a little bit about what the concept for this week's work is, or this weekend's work, as it may be now. So, we've been adding to our discussion of literary elements of short story and fiction more broadly. We've talked about, setting and plot, which are two things that kind of separate fiction from poetry in a lot of ways. A more detailed focus on, the details of the surrounding and just stuff happening, as opposed to sometimes and often merely just an experience of a feeling or a concept that the poet wants to create. Often stories, short stories and novels and fiction broadly contain more detailed, or at least more complex discussions of whatever the story is trying to create. At its heart, the story is still trying to create that vicarious experience, of course. You're supposed to get lost in visualizing what is taking place as you read the words on the page. But to that end, setting and plot are kind of distinct features of the story, as it were. And then, of course, we talked about characterization last week, the specific ways that the narrator, not the author, but the narrator, sort of characterizes people in the story. What can be derived about that character's personalities through things like what they say, what they think, how they act, of course, but then just other, maybe more symbolic aspects of characterization, like what they look like, how they are described physically, which also comes with an inherent statement about their person, their character. And then, of course, the way that other people react to them and the way they treat other people says a lot about who these characters are. And reading a character is often like reading a person that you know in real life. They say, they do things, they appear certain ways, and a lot of times judging a person is very, very similar, practically identical even, to judging a character. You're still basing your assumptions about that character off the same kinds of things. And so this week is all about symbolism and figurative language. Of course, that should seem very familiar because poetry is frequently focused on the imagery that is being created for the sake of that vicarious experience, especially if the experience the poem is trying to create is just sitting in a field of daffodils and enjoying the beauty of the day, or if the visual imagery is entirely symbolic, like the bird in the cage in Paul Laurence Dunbar's Sympathy. The bird in the cage, on a surface level, that's all what the poem is, but if you read deeper, if you read between the lines, as of course we're encouraged to do, it becomes a poem about struggle. It becomes a poem about frustration and feeling trapped. The symbolism and imagery of fiction works very, very similarly. I mean, so much of what is being described about plot and characters and the actions that propel the plot. But then there are other aspects of the imagery within fiction that operate on that deeper symbolic level. I mean, of course, any single thing may be a symbol for something related to the plot, and frequently that's kind of the requirement, is that if it is symbolic of something, it is symbolic of something that is germane to what the story is talking about. What the story is, something that's happened in the plot, or some theme that the story is commenting on, which is what we'll talk about later. It's what all this build-up is kind of leading towards. So, take for example just the image of Louise Mallard sitting in her bedroom in the big chair, looking out into the world, and of course it's described as a beautiful spring day where a lot of people are out, living their lives, and birds are singing, and it's just sort of this symbolic moment of her sitting in a room looking out the window and seeing a gorgeous day, seeing the whole world. And in that moment where she's contemplating being able to live her life body and soul free, she's seeing the world ahead of her, and in many ways that moment is symbolic, because even though she sees the world in that moment, she's still in the house, she's still with the family, she's still married to her husband. And we may not know, just as Louise know, that Brentley Mallard is actually still alive, which even adds a deeper level to what that means. She may not know it, but she's not actually out in the world like she thinks she might be. So, that kind of image could be in and of itself symbolic, but then symbolism in fiction carries a little bit more of a deeper meaning when a symbol or a type of symbol sort of gets repeated over and over again over the course of the story, and often that is meant to highlight or underpin something that the text is dealing with. Model's assistant, for example, one thing that isn't just the same image appearing over and over again, but the same type of image, is Garla, when she's at parties, frequently just is found posing with things. In one party, she is posing next to a fish tank. She's got her foot and her bondage boot up in the fish tank with the fish in the water. And then there's that other moment where she's laying on the table and somebody has dumped a little miniature Zen garden onto her belly and are raking it around, and considering that both of these things are things that people put in their house for decoration, for ornamentation, the common recurrence of this image of Garla posing next to these things becomes a motif. And what does that motif suggest? It perhaps is meant to just sort of underpin Garla's status as a object of admiration, or at least just an object for display, just something pretty that people look at and enjoy just sort of seeing about them. Garla being a model, that's basically what her job is, and that's certainly part of how the narrator characterizes her, as being ultimately kind of shallow and superficial. But that the constant recurrence of that image of Garla posing next to ornamental display objects becomes a motif of sorts. And so that's kind of the practice for this week, is looking for moments of symbolism, moments of motif. The story for this week is St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves, which is ripe for symbolic interpretation. I've mentioned a couple of ways in the discussion post prompt, a couple of motifs that seem to be appearing, the constant focus on the clothes that they wear and the weird juxtaposition of natural imagery versus man-made objects, and objects that sort of relate to civilization. And of course, all of this imagery and symbolism play off of each other. You can talk about them separately, but you also kind of have to talk about them together, because sometimes that meaning exists within that relationship. It's possible, and as I have suggested in the prompt, that the entire story is actually symbolic, in which case that would make the story a bit of an allegory of sorts. An allegory is basically when the whole story, down to everything that happens, is symbolic of something else. And I gave a couple of examples in the notes of that kind of thing. And so the task for this week is to read St. Lucy's. Don't forget to take the quiz, and then ask yourself, through an examination of those motifs that I identified, what might that allegory be? And when you break down the framework of the story and look at how these aspects of the story are presented in this repetitive way, you just look at how these objects and these ideas are spoken about, what they're doing at the time, and see if you can notice some patterns in not only the recurrence of the symbol, but the framing of those recurrences, and just ask yourself, okay, this story about girls trying, who are raised by wolves and are trying to learn to be human, what might that actually be a secondhand way of speaking to? That's the task for you this week. That is the focus of the discussion post. We got one more concept to talk about next week. Once again, apologize for the lateness of this. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be more Johnny on the spot next week. But enjoy your weekend. Have fun with the work. Enjoy St. Lucy's. It's a fun story. And let me know if I can help.